Today, the global financial system is undergoing the most rapid transformation, perhaps, in history. And certainly, a lot of the story of the global financial system is the story of the U.S. financial system. And so, what we're looking at is really a 100-year reboot or redesign of finance completely. So we're going to get into some of the details of that and why are we going to do this, because if you're an investor in the vegan economy, your investments are going to be framed inside of the greater framework of the monetary system, the values, how that works. And so it's important to have some understanding of that. You don't necessarily have to have an understanding of this to really, go out and make money, but in terms of the kind of social change that we're looking for as vegans, we want to have a deeper understanding so that we can use the financial system wisely. So before we get into those kinds of details, I want to look at the most macro thing. We touched on this earlier in the discussion about what is money. And really, money is a tokenization of something about human relationships, and especially the power relationship. Who has power over who? And in our evolutionary history, more tribal setting, we really are kind of hardwired tribally, and we're hardwired with a lot of things that may not be our ideal behavior, but they're very survival oriented. And nature has certain drives that it's built into every being, and one of the human drives is a drive for power. So money is kind of a tokenization of that, and we typically associate large amounts of money with large amounts of power. Which came first? The money is simply, again, a human construction. So what is really power? We're going to just break that down very simply. There's really two forms of power. One we'll call hard power, and that's where we're willing to use brute force to control the culture, to get the culture moving in a direction or another. And so this is the root, of course, expressed fully, that's war. And the whole, militarism and all of that comes from hard power. The idea that we human beings should come together as a community through force. And there's another power which is almost never discussed because it's not in the interest of the people who have brute power to discuss this, but it's called soft power. And soft power is essentially the power of agreement, the power to for people to align based on their own self-interest. And we, even though we are tribal animals as humans, we also have this other desire for a kind of freedom, self-determination. And so, we have our kind of basic desires as human beings. We want to, the tribal side, we want approval, but we want control in our lives, and we want our bodies to be safe. So to the extent that that can be done without force, that somebody proposes some kind of an innovation or a way of living that brings more value to people, that can be achieved without force because people make those decisions for their own self-benefit. And so these are the two kinds of power that can be expressed with money, and vegans really are much more in the second area because the idea of killing other sentient beings is antithetical to the vegan ethic. So that doesn't leave you, if you're going to go down the hard power path, one reason I never wanted to be an elected official is because the end game of that, President of the United States or of any other country, it means you have to be willing to kill other people for this in the name of power. And I've never been willing to do that. So even though I've worked in politics, once this became really clear to me, I realized we need to take a much more cultural approach to social change, and that politicians are really more and more a trailing factor in how the world looks, and that culture as a whole is really the evolving uh, guide to how the world is going to be organized. That's where veganism has a huge advantage, because literally one by one people can simply stop eating animals, stop consuming animals in their consumer products, and as we work together as a community more and more, uh, remove animals from every industrial process where they're being used as well, and then beyond that, show respect for animals by allowing them to live, making sure they have their own habitat. That's called ecosystems. So there's the not harming animals directly, and the greater or the extension of that is to begin to, as a culture, come to an agreement that respect for animals is essential to our own survival. So again, the main lesson from this topic is hard power and soft power. And when we look at the recent history of money, the past 100 years or so, what we're really looking at is the this new opportunity where the monetary system is beginning to reflect the potential for more expression of soft power, which is great, because then we don't need to fight with each other to change the culture, because it's in people's self-interest. It's clearly in people's self-interest to go vegan. They just don't get it yet. And you know, I think those of us vegans of this generation, few if any of us were born that way. Um, and the last thing I'll say, about soft power, money does flow into people that are, we can look that cultures can grow. If we go, say, look at Buddhism. Buddha himself, he he came from wealth, but he disavowed all that, and yet, he had thousands of disciples. Somehow these people were getting fed, and here, you could call it a community of beggars, but there was the flow of energy into that because enough people saw the value in having that culture exist. And there are still parts of the world where Buddhism is it's a important part of the culture. It may not be as pure as we might hope, because everything ends up getting entangled with politics at some level. But we can see that it survived. The people ate, right? If people are eating and living, that means that there's an economy. So there's an economy in soft power, and that's really what we're here to do together as vegans, is to harness that to really create a flowering of human culture. All right, on to the next lesson.